Good morning, Corey.
Good morning, Michelle.
I believe every company should strive to form a diverse table, to empower people of different skills and every time, what is it?
Skills and identities.
To foster a new generation of, okay, let's go again.
Just lent into the minimal bleakness of that office.
All we've lost, all that's been done to us, we're setting that right again.
The challenge of doing that and the excitement of doing that is incredible.
Welcome to the headquarters of the human resistance.
Where's my hair?
Your hair has been destroyed to prevent you from contacting your ship.
What ship?
Your mothership?
Okay.
And he was like, come on, think of the benefit for the film.
The police and the FBI will begin a statewide manhunt. I'm a high-profile female corporate executive. I am crucial. In all humility, I can say that.
So it's one thing building a house in 10 weeks. It's another thing dressing it.
My pulse is racing right now.
You know this is crazy. You know this is wrong.
I know who you are. I know what you are.
I know you too.
No one's going to stop me. I'm just going to do it. So it's fun. It was fun.
Hi, I'm Paula Benson, founder and editor of Film and Furniture. And today on the Film and Furniture podcast, we step inside the unsettling, meticulously constructed world of Bugonia, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. The film moves between three distinct environments: a chaotic, time-stalled house of Teddy, played by Jesse Plemons, and the cool, modernist spaces occupied by Michelle, played by Emma Stone, and a final world that slips fully into the otherworldly. But across all of them, architecture, furniture, and interiors are doing precise narrative work, quietly shaping how we read character, power and control. In this episode, I'm joined by the brilliant production designer James Price, who also collaborated with Yorgos on Poor Things. To discuss how these worlds in Bugonia were built, we talk about designing chaos, using restraint as a visual language, and how subtle design decisions can guide us as the audience without ever needing to explain themselves. He also shares some secrets on the bonkers world we see towards the end. This episode works just as well without visuals, but it is a video podcast, so you can watch along for the full experience. And just a heads up, this interview contains spoilers. So hi James, welcome to the Film and Furniture podcast. An absolute honour, genuinely, to meet you and talk to you about your work. And today we're going to be talking about Bugonia. What a world you've created with this. So we've got several different worlds. We have Michelle, the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. Her world is very controlled and very modern. And then we have the world of Teddy and his cousin, who are the conspiracy theorists that believe that Michelle, played by Emma Stone, is an alien. So where do you start with a project like this? When did you get involved? At what stage did you get involved?
So, hi, Paula. Basically, I get a one-line email off Yorgos saying, going to send you a script. Might be my next movie. Let me know what you think. What would you like to bring to it? Or, how would you like to do it? So I read it, initially loved it. And then I kind of thought, oh, this is an opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do, which is build a house in a landscape for real. Also build the inside. Traditionally you would maybe, if you're going to do that, build the exterior and then go to a studio in the warm and dry and build the interior. So that's what I pitched. I didn't think at that stage we'd build a basement on site because I thought that was too insane. But I pitched that. But I said we'd need some time because if we're going to do that, even though it's set in America, I believe that we could do it somewhere in Europe. And a lot of people he collaborates with are here in London. So he was like, let's look at doing it around London. So we decided that we would try and find 3 sites and put planning in on all of those sites because anything go wrong at any time. And once we were looking and scouting for that one early on, Yorgos looks to me and goes, why why are we not building the basement with the house? And I said to him, because I didn't think anyone would let us. And he was like, come on, think of the benefit for the film. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's look into that, because it would totally be brilliant for just shooting in a sequence for the characters. And at the same time I was like, oh man, what happens if there's solid rock under there? What happens if there's so we did a couple of pilot holes. We decided that we would dig a massive grate hole, drop 7 shipping containers in, cut them up, weld them together, and then put a steel frame on top, and then build the house all around, for which I wanted 14 weeks to do. And we had 10 weeks. So from the moment we dug to the moment we filmed on, we had 10 weeks, which was pretty impressive to get that level of detail, I think. And with Yorgos, because he shoots so wide, and Robbie as well, with Robbie's beautiful naturalistic lighting, that you're designing a house or a set which is in the environment, but you're going to light it with natural light. You're going to wire it for real. The practicals. There's sort of dogma is no film lights inside, so any film light comes through the windows. So you're designing and tailor making for certain shots. That scenes, and this is what's great about design of a film, is that scene's going to happen at the dinner table. You want to be able to see that what's going to show off the room. And I'd also done a film called The Iron Claw a few years before in the States, and we needed to find a ranch house for that. So I knew and that proved quite tricky, actually, to find that ranch house. And so that was sort of fueling me forward to say, well, actually, to let someone come into your house, you're not going to find anywhere with a basement. We're not going to find anywhere that's going to let us do these things, but we can design this house in this landscape, and it become character in its own right. And so the challenge of doing that and the excitement of doing that is kind of, it was incredible.
I don't think general public realise what's involved in creating sets. So it's one thing sort of drawing some amazing sketches and then moving to concept art and art direction and creating these wonderful sets. But there's this whole other world, isn't there, literally underground, of sort of planning permission. I mean, God, did you train as an architect? I don't think you did you? But I guess you need to have some of those skills along the way.
No, I am a pseudo architect. I haven't trained as an architect, although if I had my time again, maybe I would do. But yeah, you're right. And then also, how do you build that prefab? So there's a lot of how much can you prefab? What materials do you use? Do you use real, the tiles I wanted to be a particular shape? Can you get those for real? Do you make those tiles? There was also the hill on the side where the beehives are. We started to build in early spring, and we were shooting, so we wanted that grass to grow up. Construction company building had to be mindful of not just putting stuff everywhere so the grass would get ruined. Once that's gone, you can't recreate it. You've got to just let it stand for a year to let it all grow up. We decided we'd bring up one actual beehive there, so we transported that. How do you do that? You have to go and visit the bee person, and that has to be transported all together at a certain time of the day, and then there has to be a cordon off area so nobody can go within that area without having the suits on. And so it's one thing building a house in 10 weeks, it's another thing dressing it, and then the level of detail dressing inside in terms of this backstory that this house had been built in the early part of the 20th century. It was a small holding house. It'd been in the farm. The last major refit had been in the 90s. Teddy then was given, my mother went into full-time medical care when he was sort of old enough to look after himself. Well, by the law's eye, but not really. He's not a man. Then the story of his kind of descendants into this conspiracy theory nut, and you were supposed to think that he is an absolute psychopath. That he is crazy. He's loony, and all the way through, you wanting to feed that. So there's different conspiracy theories in there. The one that everyone seems to like, and Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons have mentioned a few times, is like the birds aren't real. They're spying on you from the government. And there was lots of, and then half made ideas of computers have been taken apart and put back together, and there's lots and lots of layers and layers of years of dressing. The aging of the wallpaper. Those wallpapers were actually from out of print wallpapers from an American. Peru bought a book off eBay of American wallpapers, and we scanned them in and we changed the colorways because we weren't happy with the way the colors were. We changed the design slightly. Zillow which is equivalent of Zoopla in the States. So Peru was going around looking at properties for sale that we know with 90s kitchens. That's where that kind of suspended kitchen in the middle of the in the kitchen comes from, which is distinctly, we've been praised on how American that is and how essentially that feels right. But that barrier, and it's a hexagonal shape, it's, you know, it's a nod to the bees, becomes a physical barrier, especially when the police officer Casey and Jesse, who is Teddy, are stood there, and it becomes a physical barrier in the scene with Michelle and Teddy again. It's about design, it's about telling the story, but it's also authenticity. And I'm kind of pretty keen not to use many film references. I want a teenage boy's bedroom. I don't want to see references from other films, or, you know, actually one that's really hard to find, girls' bedrooms. It's really hard. So quite often when I've been around over the years, you pick up references because you look in people's houses, you find in pictures, because I find film can become self-referencing. And so I'm keen not to look at other things like painters and photographers and for reference within it. Yeah.
So Teddy's house is suspended in the 90s because his mother obviously went into hospital, and this is where the conspiracy theory starts. Just recapping on the story here. So this is where obviously he's trying to find some reason and control in all this, and this is where the conspiracy theory starts, that Michelle pharmaceutical company has caused her to be really ill and in a coma in hospital. So as a result, this house is suspended in time in the 1990s, and also being a young boy, it's chaos, right? So how do you design chaos, right? So there's bits of paper everywhere, there's bits of computers, there's the basement, there's this incredible scene that takes place at the dining table, which is like the central zone for a lot of conversation before they move to the basement. But the house is layered madness. How do you go about designing that?
It's difficult, actually. I'd visited I grew up on a farm, and I visited in the early noughties with my wife a house in New Zealand, and it had been built mid 1800s, so like high Victorian, beautiful, exquisite carving, wooden carving, and this house was beautiful. And there were three brothers whose parents had both died when they were allowed, you know, just like Teddy, they were old enough to look after themselves in the law's eyes, but not really. And so they'd been dead so they'd been in the teens, and they were in their 30s, early 40s, some of them. So like getting on for a similar sort of time. And this house, although when you looked at it, architecturally was beautiful, was an absolute tip. There was chickens in the kitchen, there was muck everywhere. You like literally would not want to take your wellies off. And so there was this layering of just unkeptness. And I had this memory of this, but I couldn't find any photos. It's early days of digital cameras. So I know somewhere I did have them, but I probably lost them on the drive. And so I had this memory of this place that we came back to. And we never thought it was going to be originally. It evolved when we started doing camera tests and talking to JJ Costume. And then it's really hard to find. You're never going to find a perfect reference. So what we had was a lot of photographic reference, and would circle areas of dressing, like that bit there under somebody's sideboard and that bit there. And so we would then build that up. And same with the basement, we sort of looked at where the story of it, you know, where the pipework goes. Oh, there was maybe this bit here that was once plastered, or he started doing this and knocked that out. And so you have to tell this story. And it's like a good scenic artist or you can always tell scenic painting when it hasn't been thought through. You walk into a set and you'll be like, why is that bit of mold there? A lot of it is instinctive and intuitive, and you look at the references and you pick it out, and then you go back and you layer it up over time. You can't really design that. It evolves.
Sure, like a living, breathing environment. I'm sure that makes for very different sort of performances when the characters can actually feel they're in a real house. But there's some details I really noticed that I was like, I like that. Where did that come from? Well, I loved all of it, to be honest, James, but there's bits of it where in the kitchen where you've got almost two different designed or looking kitchens sort of fitted together, and that's sort of like that sort of adds this just slight unease of the house, right?
Yeah.
You're not meant to feel comfortable there, but just these little subtle design details. I was like, what made you decide to have two sides of the kitchen are like completely different cabinets?
That sort of stuff evolves some, because the best place to get kitchens from is eBay. People sell the kitchens. So there were two different kitchens, and there was another kitchen that was in the utility room. And it was like, should we make doors to match our favorite kitchen, or should we just mix and match it? And it just seemed to make sense. So kind of necessity, you're given that as a gift by the fact that you haven't got enough cupboards to make that thing, and then you're like, oh, hang on a second, this is perfect because so you don't necessarily set out to do it that way, but what the circumstance you have, you're like, oh, of course, yeah.
It's the same as like the mismatched chairs, and nothing's quite organized. It's just it's a living, breathing environment that's gone a bit wrong somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I mean the chair things like that though, that we had a huge amount of chairs, but we had a lot of stuff that came in and then went out and then came back in, and you're trying to figure that out. So that mismatch of that was an evolution of having enough stuff. You can't really predict what's going to work. Some of the cupboards would come in and go out because it wasn't quite right, or they'd be aged or grained or whatever. So ideally I would have liked another couple of weeks to play around with that stuff. So no one seems to realize how quickly we did it, which is good, because everyone has responded very well to that house, and really felt that, and then it's a character in its own right.
So before we move on to looking at Michelle's world, I just wanted to touch on the fact that I've only just discovered recently that the script and the story was based on this South Korean film of 2003, Saving the Green Planet. Now, this is new to me. I've never heard of it, and obviously I need to go and watch it. Did you watch it before working on the film, or did you deliberately ignore it?
I did watch it because I thought enough time had gone by. Interestingly, the year before I'd made a remake of Speak No Evil, but that had only been made 2 years before, and I never watched that till because I didn't want it to infect any decision making. But this I felt was long enough away, and then you watch it and it's totally, I mean, the main protagonists, there's like a man and a girlfriend, they're in a mine, they're in a deserted mine, not a house. So essentially it's the same story, but in terms of the design of it, it's very different. And I was interested to watch it for what they did at the end, how they approached that. So yeah, no, I did, and it was fun. It was fun and funny, actually. Yeah, good. If you like Korean and Japanese movies, then it's worth watching, definitely.
Worth a watch. Excellent.
Before we return to my conversation with James, a quick word about some of the furniture and lighting in Bugonia, and in particular the home and office of Michelle, played by Emma Stone. Her spaces are defined by restraint and intent, like the Barcelona chairs by Mies van der Rohe in her office, and the Henrique Pedersen Emola chair and the Jan Bochan armchairs in her home all signal control and quiet power. Even in her gym, the Nord curved treadmill and weight system feel more like tools for a body operating beyond ordinary limits. In her office, the ribbon lamp, slightly warped and high gloss black, sits alongside a Frank Lloyd Wright floor lamp. If these objects caught your eye, you'll find more on each piece and where to source them in our marketplace at filmandfurniture.com. You'll find the links in the show notes below.
So moving on to Michelle's house, which is a complete contrast. She is a woman who needs another kind of control, very much about power and wealth. And that's reflected in this amazing corporate office and her home. So starting with the office, is this a real place?
Yeah, it's out on the M4, actually. Initially, when we thought about it, I kind of thought, oh, well, there's lots of pharmaceutical headquarters in the UK. Maybe we can just go and shoot one of those. And then when you get to these modern office builds, actually, we went to one place in Cambridge, and I was like, where's the CEO sit? And they're like, oh, it's not very exciting. I was like, yeah, but I need to see where the CEO's office is. It doesn't have an office, and it's just in a desk with everybody else. And so it's kind of like, oh, right, where's the, us and them sort of thing. And I kind of always wanted to do her world in the modernist kind of 2001 high design, alluding that she might be an alien. I wanted her world to be as if she was living in a spaceship. And so we went to this building, and there was one clear floor, and it didn't have any suspended ceiling, didn't have any flooring tiles on the floor. It was just the aluminium sheeting of the floor, and all the aircon and the ducting was in there. And I was like, this is perfect. This is a blank canvas. We can just do what we like. So I had this idea that she was in a cube box in the middle of this room, and there was just these glass cubes, bit Borg-like, the cube idea, but then also she can survey everybody, and it's like this soulless but still kind of cool environment. And originally that carpet that leads to her office was a red carpet or a burnt orange, but Yorgos didn't like the color of it, but because I was sort of riffing on the red carpet thing, but kind of the black kind of worked better, I think, in the end. And so just lent into the minimal bleakness of that office. Originally we'd got a lot of Corbusier armchairs in the hallway and stuff, but then we ended up going for the Barcelona chair in reality, I think. But in the model we did, I just liked the way that glass reflected the greenery of the outside, and then inside was this kind of homogeneous space where no one's, and it plays into the whole 5:30 thing. Oh yeah, go home at 5:30, but you can't really go home at 5:30. It really works well, because that was the one thing. I mean, knew it was really long, and there are a lot of these office buildings now. I think is it the Google buildings, very long and thin and on the ground. And actually, when you look at that, if you take off from Heathrow going out towards west, when the runway's going that rather than into London, you can see that building. I've flown over it, and it's the shape of two set squares put together. It's triangle, so it's one set square there and then another one like that, and we were at the front, the long end there, and I was like, that's some architect designed that as a joke, that whole shape of that building is based on two set squares end to end. And then on the computer screens, we learned this trick on low budget TVs. If you print on glossy paper a computer screen from a distance with light shine on it, it looks like a real screen. So you look like you've got these screens on, but they're just bits of paper stuck onto them. And then the ones near a camera, you do for real with real screens and stuff.
I love that scene where she walks up. It almost feels like a fashion runway where she's walking towards her glass box office along what feels like, you say it was originally you'd imagined it as red, but I think it works really brilliantly. It's this dark space as she's sort of walking towards like a sort of fashion strut.
I kind of wanted to sort of signify that she could be an alien with that space. With that, I really wanted it to feel like that building could just take off and fly away, and that would be it, And it just
which is how I think as a designer you're speaking up to the audience, aren't you? Really, you're kind of is she an alien? Is she not? And these little subtle things you're bringing, you're playing on people's intelligence rather than delivering it or not delivering it. You're kind of teasing it in the subtlest ways that you start thinking, is she an alien? I think she might. It's all those sorts of things that I think are brought through the design. And then a house as well. So I understand this is a real house in Surrey. How did you go about finding that? I mean, it's pretty stunning.
It is stunning, and it only just been finished a year before, 2 years before, and it was built by a CEO and a lot of time in the States. And our location scout Ben found it, the Crown Estate, is it, in Egham, and saw this house, and I obviously briefed him and said I wanted something really as modernist as possible, modernist but contemporary of now, and that's what we found. And it was stunning. They were very kind of unsure about letting us film for obvious reasons, because it is a big thing, but they also built the house and they hadn't done grand designs or anything like that, but they wanted to preserve it for the future, do something. And they'd made this incredible book about the building of the house, and when she's sat with the mask on at the beginning, there's a tree that you can see beyond her. That tree is the only thing that stands of the house that was on that site, and they built the house around that tree. And I was like, well, if you want to preserve this house for, do something for you, this is the film to do it with. We're going to be shooting on VistaVision, which is like this old format that's being slightly having a renaissance now, and it's going to look absolutely stunning. This house, in the hands of Yorgos and Robbie, it's never going to look any better. So So they were game for it and let us shoot in their house, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's a pretty spectacular swimming pool. I presume that's exactly as it is, that scene where Jesse floors Emma as they're running past as she's trying to get up the garden. So the garden is all very tended. There's these amazing sort of box hedges, and it's all very neat and very controlled. And again, sort of emphasizing her sort of power status. And then in the swimming pool, you've got these two Jan Bocan or Bosan chairs. I thought they were amazing, those chairs.
Yeah, Prue, the set decorator, chose a selection of chairs and furniture, and Yorgos, his knowledge of design and contemporary design is incredible. And when you're dealing with the House of Teddies, which is chaotic, you've got a lot of freedom, but when you're dealing with one piece or two pieces, he kind of has an opinion on that. So one of the problems with what we do as designers is that, not the problem, but you have the higher houses which have a stock of the design classics, and that they're readily available, but you see them time and time again because they're in a higher house. And so it's difficult to try and do something which is kind of iconic, but they're not been in a million dramas, or do you know what I mean? So they're a triumph actually in that space, and it's definitely Prue's doing that, and that's kind of all we did in that space was put them in. I mean, even so much so that I'm thinking, like, do you know what? I need to start designing furniture and having my own stuff, because not for the film, like do it outside the film. And it's something I've been thinking about, is just have my own furniture that I get into films. And then the other chair that's the one that she's got the mask, which is the
I think it's a molar chair.
Hendrik thingy bob one. Yeah, that was actually theirs. They had
Okay.
that hat. It seemed to fit just right, and we asked them if we could borrow their chair. But the way it sort of encompasses her and kind of feels like a baddie's chair, especially with that mask on.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit actually of a sort of early sort of Bond chair, a wingback chair, which is sort of framing the face, normally a villain. So
Yeah.
that's because this is film and furniture, and I'm not sure how many other people might recognize that, but these are just subtle little tweaks that you kind of think, oh, she's
Yeah.
she's dodgy.
The Bond bat villain Blofeld chair, very Blofeld like. Interestingly, getting onto that, one of the reasons I kind of lent into making her world very much like a spaceship, or that she's in spaceships, is that I did a few years ago I did the remake of Ipcris Files for TV, and I always loved Ipcris Files. I'm a massive, huge Cold War fan, espionage, like real life fiction. Grew up on James Bond, and so I went back and studied Ken Adams' design for that, and it's masterful. You've got Dolby, whose office has this. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar. It's a jet black floor. There's this bust in the corner silhouetted, and you're not sure whether it's Churchill or Stalin, and everything about his office is telling you that is a pared back Bond villain baddie's lair. You've got this weird camp bed he sits on, but everything that Dolby says is patriotic, and you just think that he's the goody. You as the audience, you presume he's a goody, but everything about Ken Adams' designing is screaming at you, that dude is the baddie. And then Ross's office, who you're like, Ross acts really weird and he's sort of making underhand things and something's going on. You're like, oh, Ross is dodgy, dodgy, dodgy. Yeah, on his office, there's a picture of the Queen behind him. There's a beautifully laid out. There's always a colored rose on his desk. Everything about you is telling you he is a quintessentially good egg British spy, and yet you think he's the baddie. And so watching that movie is like, oh man, and I've watched it. It's so masterfully done. And Kenham's obviously famous for all these incredible feats of production design in the Bonds and the bad villains, and but that film, and it's all shot on location, but it's a really worth watching to any inspiring designers, as what you can do in terms of, it's very much designed, it's hugely designed, but there's a sense of believability about it and the kind of thing, and also how on the nose you can be with stuff, and you're leading the audience to it, but because the character's saying something else, you're going to believe. And that's why I kind of lent into that I was braver with some of the choices for Michelle's world because of that movie.
Yeah, all those subtle semiotics are incredible, aren't they? Just a little thing here and there can really like tell the story. It's amazing. So moving on to the Andromedan world, I mean, James, where did that come from?
uh, all over the place. I mean, it's Yorgos. I can't be. I kind of also like the idea that it'd be opposites the modernist. So we got the modernist version, and then we got the out there Andromedan world. And I kind of racked my brains because in the script it was literally, oh, it's in a throne room, a box appears and glass box with a red button. Uh, what are we going to do? And so I kind of thought about it for a while. And this is one of the things of the development work. And I spent 90% of my time thinking about that end sequence or that sequence and the bit beyond. And so my first pitch to him was they're basically that if they're curated humans, they're obviously probably as flawed as we are. So I'm like, do you know what? They've destroyed their planet and they're riding around space in this biosphere sphere because I was like feeling rather pleased with myself that I'd read that a sphere is the best way to travel through space. Only to 2 days later, going, why has no one ever done a sphere before spaceship? 2 days later to go have this moment of, oh my God, you're a moron. Of course, the Death Star. That's why no one's done it since, because who's going to take on a Death Star? But I had this idea that they're in a biosphere around this holy pool of water, and they're a bunch of hippies, and they had long hair and pot bellies, and they were running around this nuclear fusion sphere, which was all kind of chrome with big rivets, like harking back to the golden days of American space travel. The 50s kind of version of what the future would be. Um, and he was like, yeah, but we then started looking, and we went wide. He had Matthew Barney, who's a fine artist. It was kind of he liked his stuff. There was a Dutch painter that we found who'd done these amazing landscapes. It were landscapes, but the way that they were painted and the colors were, these reds and oranges and blues, and the kind of rocks weren't like rocks. So they were landscape, but they weren't impressionistic because they were very, very. They almost gave me a feel of a man who fell to earth kind of feel, and so we went into that. And then I never let go of this holy water place, this holy place where the temple, it becomes a temple, not a throne room. And I kind of read that when you get teleported, the version of you that exists no longer exists anymore. It's an exact facsimile, and that freaked me out. It's like, well, the version of me is gone, and then there's this other version which is just like you, but it's not actually you. It's like a clone of you. So I kind of thought, oh, that's a bit like rebirth, and so I started thinking, oh, well, wouldn't it be funny if she has to go through this pool of viscose material? And then Yorgos liked that idea, and then I shaved it around a womb. I was like, oh, so it's literally a rebirth. And at one time there was like ovary-shaped hills, and then it kind of became very much all of the buildings were based on human anatomy. And then I read this theory about this thing called a Dyson sphere, which there's this theory that you're supposed to be able to maybe harness this power of a sun. And I was like, well, that's what's powering it. It's this sun at the back. So the back end of it is a sun that's encapsulated in this biosphere, but the Dyson sphere, which had this kind of membrane around it, which is why the whole rest of the rest of the ship doesn't set on fire. And then I was looking at bees and kind of bee colonies, but that all felt too on the nose. And so we were looking at ant hills and how when they've discovered how they work, they filled them with hot metal and pulled them out. So you have this kind of like skeleton feeling to it. So that became the
Sorry,
shape.
who fills them with hot metal?
Well, scientists did when they were figuring out. I don't think they do it anymore.
How they're built.
Yeah. So when they were working out how they were built, they sort
okay.
of make a mold and then dig out the thing. And so there's these incredible structures of these civilizations that are going underground, and that kind of fed into it. And then there were like the lung building, the kind of so it all evolved out of a lot of different things over it. And the whole time that we were doing the development work for the house, I was spending time thinking about this. And then we shot that towards the end of the shoot. So there was a long build up to that. And then with JJ working out what they would wear. And So essentially, the whole idea that it was a sacred, like that throne room in my head's like a couple of millennium old, and so it sort of, and I've watched it a few times with audience, and it gets a massive laugh when that bit happens. People just like burst out laughing, which I
Yeah,
love.
and it's so unexpected, and to be honest, I think it's complete genius because the film sort of switches from comedy to tragedy quite seamlessly, and I think that's the hardest thing to pull off. And I was trying to work out, I'm not a critic, right? I'm a fan, so I was trying to work out why it works so well, and I was thinking, obviously the script's brilliant, the production design hangs together so well, the editing is great, but that last scene you can't help but laugh because it's so unexpected. I mean, did I read somewhere like the thrones that you modeled on teeth or something? Or
Yeah, they're kind of like ground down teeth was the idea that they were all slightly different and based on that. And then yeah, there's this visceral sort of quality to the room above it, and just like I mean, Yorgos never once said to me, "You've made a womb-shaped pool," but I had, and we were building it. I said to Adam, I said, "Nobody's ever said that you can't build this, or what are you doing basing this all on the human anatomy? This is bonkers stupid." I'm like, "Huh? No one's going to stop me. I'm just going to do it." So it's fun. It was fun. It's kind of fun, and that's what the film Ted is, which is like the extreme kind of real, grounded in realism. Michelle's, which is somewhere in the middle, and then you have this out there, just completely batshit crazy world of the Andromedans. It sort of fills everything that you ever want to do professionally as a, because we get pigeonholed in design, I think, creatively, of just doing one thing or another. And so I'm incredibly lucky and fortunate to just be able to do all of that stuff that I love doing in one movie.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. So I guess my last question is, how does a boy who grew up on a farm in Herefordshire come to be working in some of the biggest cinematic, craziest, and most creative worlds that have been formed? How does that happen?
uh over a period of long time, being batshit crazy yourself and just thinking I can go and do it. And it sort of doesn't happen overnight, does it? It's sort of, I'm very fortunate as well. There's a lot of fortune that has happened along the way. I was fortunate enough to be born in a time when higher education was free and I could go to university and do all that. Whether I would do that now, maybe not. I was also fortunate that I was going to have an apprenticeship as a stonemason at 16, which fell apart literally 2 weeks before I was supposed to start the stonemasonry apprenticeship. And I went to art college, and I'm fortunate that I lived near Hereford, which is an independent art college, still independent. And I was like dyslexic, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go and do A levels. I'll go to the art college for a couple of years and then get back into stonemasonry. And you're like, everyone's going to go to university and do an arts degree. Cool, that sounds cool. And then you start, and of course, being born in a time when I love movies. I'd always loved movies growing up. With dad was a big movie consumer, and so movies were a thing that we loved, but they were never a option. Like, you just went, and so I just went on this. Oh, I went to university, and then somewhere at the university, things had started to happen, like Shallow Grave and Train Spotting. I remember going and getting nicked off college, but well, that wasn't anything new. And went on to the multi-story in Derby and watched Train Spotting. And then suddenly with Danny Boyle, and then you had Shane Meadows do 24/7, and you're like, that guy's from the Midlands. I'm in the Midlands, so you start thinking, oh, maybe. And my work started heading towards, I'd always been a fan of the Avengers TV show from the 60s, was, so kind of like always trying to get all my projects revolved around. I was doing contemporary furniture or trying to make contemporary furniture, but they always evolved around film themes. And then it seemed like a pragmatic thing to do. Actually, there was this thing, TV and film, maybe I could have, and then it was an option of like, I came to London and I joined this new designers in business. And then I realized that actually I'd have to set up a business. But I don't want to do a business. I'm 22, 23. I just come from a small farm that was failing. And you've got to make stuff and then sell it. That sounds crazy. I met these two guys, and one was the creative one and one was the business guy, and I was like, that's gonna happen. And then it was sort of like film became TV, and I got into TV first. There was a great course in Kingston, which is now where I still live, the production design MA, and that was good money for money. It was like 1 year, and I blagged my way on there. And it was pragmatic. It's like blue collar. You do a day's work and you get paid a day's work in film and TV. There's not very many other creative disciplines where you get paid that way. A lot of creative disciplines are a labor of love. You do the creative thing and then you've got to try and sell it or monetize it. But with film, you do your day's design or art directing or whatever it is, scenic painting, and then you get paid for that day.
That's true.
So the dreamer, but also the pragmatic side of me led me here.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, you've ended up in an amazing spot. I mean, working with one of the most creative directors walking the planet right now. And it sounds like, because you are incredibly pragmatic and quite down to earth, I have to say, but obviously you've got this incredible imagination, and thank you for bringing it to the screen with Bugonia.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun.
When you get to work on this furniture range that you're talking about, don't forget to come and talk to us.
I will do, definitely. Yeah, I will do. Good.
An absolute pleasure, James. Thank you so much, and congratulations again on creating an incredible world.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful chat. You can take a look at our in-depth feature and film set images at filmandfurniture.com, where you'll find many fascinating articles on interiors, furniture, decor and lighting in film, as well as where to find these items for your own home. That's all in our marketplace. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.